Welcome back, guys. Today we're going to learn how to build top performance Nginx servers for Laravel. We will build the Nginx server with PHP-FPM and OP cache. To demonstrate the performance difference, I have created 3 sample projects in here. One is using PHP Artisan Serve, the other one is using Nginx, and the last one is using Nginx plus OP cache. For the PHP Artisan, if you take a look here, this time 49 milliseconds is how long it took this page to load, which is the default Laravel web page. Let's refresh this page a few times and you can see it's averaging out around 42 to 45 milliseconds. For the Nginx build, if we refresh our web page, you can see it's about the same, ranges from 42 to 45. Now for the Nginx plus OP cache, if we refresh our web page, you can see here it takes around 5 milliseconds up to 9 milliseconds. Looks like it averages out to 6. If we compare the Nginx plus OP cache with, let's say, the Laravel Artisan Serve, it's about 7 times faster than here, and about the same for just the Nginx. So using OP cache with Nginx is going to be 7 times faster than your standard way of building your Docker containers. Before diving into the course, guys, you should know your way around Docker for Laravel. If you're new to Docker, I highly recommend you watch my previous videos. I have one called Laravel Docker Course, Complete Laravel Dockerization. If you're using Windows, I highly recommend you watch my other video, Windows WSL2 Docker Tutorial. Both links are in the description. Our first step, we're going to create a new Laravel project. I am inside my workspace folder. I'm going to create a new directory. Let's call it Laravel Docker Nginx OP cache. Now let's go inside our new directory. And in here, you want to go ahead and open your code editor. I'm using VS Code. All right, now in here, we're going to create a new Laravel project using Composer. So I'm going to write Composer, create project, Laravel/Laravel, and a dot. Now, once you have the project created, let's go ahead and modify our env file. Let's set the database to Laravel. For the username, you can set it to whatever name you like. I'm going to use Homestead. For the password, make sure you add a valid string. I'm going to use secret. In here, let's change the app URL to 127.0.0.1, and we're going to expose port 8000. Now we're going to create our starter Docker files. Inside your project, go ahead and create a new folder, call it Docker. Inside here, create another folder, call it Nginx. Inside here, create another file and call it nginx.conf. Inside the Docker folder, go ahead and create a new folder. Let's call it PHP. In here, you want to create 2 new files, one called php.ini, another one called php-fpm.conf. And inside the Docker folder, you want to go ahead and create a new file, call it entry.point.sh. Let's go ahead and minimize all these. Now we're going to create our Docker file. And let's make sure that this file is placed in the main directory. Let's go ahead and create another file and let's call it docker-compose.yaml, YML. Now let's go ahead and build our database server. Let's go to our Docker Compose file and let's add our version. So we're going to use version 3.8 and let's create a new service. So we're going to write services. I'm going to add a comment and I'm going to say database service. Let's go ahead and call it database and let's give it a name. So I'm going to say container name and we're going to name the service database. For the image, I'm going to use MySQL 8.0. For the ports, let's go ahead and expose port 3306 to 3306. Now we're going to set our username and password and database name. So in here, we're going to write environments and I'm going to open my env file. So in here, we need to select the MySQL database name and that we're going to grab from our env variable right here, database. So we write db_database. Let's go ahead and copy this a few times. Now the second variable is going to be called MySQL_user. Let's copy this from here. And let's go ahead and add MySQL_password. That's coming from here. And the last one would be MySQL_root_password. And let's set that to equal the same password that we have. Now, if we run this, it should work, but we don't have a volume. If you don't have a volume, the problem is once you restart this container, you will lose all your data. So let's go ahead and add a new volume so we could persist our data. I'm gonna call it db-data. And I'm gonna store this inside my main project folder. And in here, I'm going to use that volume. So we write volumes, and we're going to use our db data volume, and we're going to point to our MySQL data, and that's going to be inside var lib MySQL. And this should be ready to go. Let's give it a try. So I'm gonna write docker compose up -d. Let's go ahead and write docker compose ps, and you should see your database working. Now we're going to be building our PHP service. Let's go to our Docker file. And in here, let's go ahead and pull our image. So we're going to write from PHP, and we're going to use PHP 8.1-FPM. And we're going to create this as PHP. Now let's go back to our Docker compose file. And in here on top of the database, let's go ahead and add our PHP service. So I'm going to add a comment in here and say PHP service. And in here, let's call it PHP. For the container name, let's call it PHP. And for the build steps, we're going to reference our Docker file. So let's go ahead and write build. The context is going to be this location. So we write dot, and the target is going to be PHP. That's the one that we created in here. So whatever is under here is our target. For the working directory, let's set it to var www. So what this does is makes it every time you sh into your container, by default, you will start in this directory. This is where we will be hosting our website. For the ports, let's go ahead and expose port 8000 to 8000. And we want to make sure that this service is built after our database. So in here, we write depends on, and we want to go ahead and write this database service in here. Now we want to specify our volume. So I'm going to add it right under the working directory in here. Let's write volumes, and I want to map this current location to var www. Now let's just give this a quick try. Let's write docker compose up -d. Now this is a very common error if you see this, permission denied. If you have this, you want to go ahead and write ls-la inside your Docker folder, and let's see what permissions we have here. So if you see, our entry point doesn't have any permissions. So let's go ahead and give it read and write permission. So I'm going to do chmod 755, and we're going to go to our entry file. Now let's try to run docker compose up again. Now let's do docker compose ps and see the status of our container. In here, it looks like we have an error. Let's view our log. I'm going to use my Docker interface. In here, if you click on your container, you should see this error here. And this is fine because we haven't really built our entry point file yet. Let's go back to our code editor, and let's go to our Docker file. Now in here, the first thing I want to do is I want to create a new user. You don't want to be running things with your root user. Let's go ahead and create a new user. So we write run user mod -u 1000 and the username. So I'm going to call it www-data. Right under here, let's go ahead and run apt-get update. And let's go ahead and run apt-get install -y. Let's install unzip libpq-dev libcurl 4-gnutls dev nginx. Now let's go ahead and install some PHP extensions. So I'm going to run docker php extension install. So we're going to install PDO for MySQL, bcmath, curl, and obcache. After we have all the basic extensions and software installed on our server, let's go ahead and copy our files from this location to our working directory location. So let's set our work directory to var www. And also when we copy our files, let's go ahead and set the user permission. So I'm going to write here shown equal www data. Now this part is very important, especially this part too. When we start running Laravel, you will get permission errors when Laravel tries to write for logs. So this would be how we fix it. Now let's go ahead and install Composer. So we write copy from Composer, and the version is 2.3.5. And we want to copy this from the user bin composer folder to the user bin composer folder in our server. And might as well run few commands. Let's run php artisan cache clear, run php artisan config clear. And in here, let's go ahead and make sure that we have the correct permissions set on our storage and bootstrap files. So we want to run chmod recursive 755 inside our var www storage folder. This is where Laravel is going to be writing our logs. Let's go ahead and do the same thing, but for our var www bootstrap folder. This is where Laravel will write and cache things. Now under here, we want to call our entry point file. So we write entry point, and the file was inside our Docker folder. It's called entry point.sh. Now let's go to our entry point file. We place that inside our Docker folder. We call the entry point.sh. In here, we want to run composer, install, no progress, and no interaction. And we want to also copy our env file if it does not exist. Now I'm going to wrap both of these in an if statements. So for the first one, I'm going to say if the file vendor autoload does not exist, then we want to run the composer install. Otherwise, we don't want to keep reinstalling it every time we build our container. And for the env file, we want to do the same thing. We're going to say if the file env does not exist, then we want to do this. Let's go ahead and close our if statement in here. Actually, I'm going to add an echo here and just say creating env file. Now let's go ahead and go to the bottom. In here, we want to write PHP-FPM-D, and we want to write Nginx-G daem off. And this will start our Nginx and PHP-FPM servers. Now let's go to our terminal. In here, you want to write docker compose build, use the no cache flag, and we want to also run docker compose up force recreate -d in detached mode. So what this will do is make sure that we rebuild all our Docker containers and not use the cache. And this one will force to recreate our containers. Let's just give this a quick try. It shouldn't work because we haven't created our Nginx server configuration yet, but let's just see what we have so far. Now, once that's done, let's go ahead and write docker compose ps. And here it looks like we have an error. So let's go back to our Docker interface. I'm going to go to my PHP container, and you see this error here. It says execute Docker entry point, execute format error. Whenever you see this, what it means is that inside your entry point, you're missing your bin bash comment in here. So you need this for all bash files. So you write here a number sign, exclamation mark, and you want to point to your bash executable. Usually it's inside the bin bash folder. Now there's just one more issue here in my file. I just need to fix this typo in here. So for here, you want to add the dash to the if, and that should be pretty much it. Let's go ahead and give this a try in our terminal. Let's go ahead and write docker compose up -d to run in detached mode. Once that's done, let's go ahead and write docker compose ps. And here, it looks like both of my containers are up and running. We haven't configured Nginx yet, but let's just go ahead and open our browser. And let's make sure that Nginx is installed. So we write 127.0.0.1 at port 8000. And in here, we're getting empty response. And this is a good sign because we haven't really configured Nginx. Now we're going to set our PHP-FPM configuration and our PHP init configuration. For the PHP-FPM configuration, I have added the default file inside my GitHub account. So you want to go to the browser. You want to write github.com/emad, EMAD-ZAAMOUT, emad zamut. This is my GitHub account. You want to go to repositories. In here, you want to search for php-fpm.conf. And you should see I have this project right here. And there is the configuration file for PHP-FPM. This is mostly the default configuration with some adjustments. Let's copy the whole thing. So I'm just going to copy the whole thing. Right here, there's a button called copy. Let's go back to our code editor and let's add it in here. So the big part is in here, if you scroll down, this listen is what we're using for our PHP-FPM. We added this inside our Nginx configuration, if you guys remember, right here. So this has to be the same. And one more note. So here, there's the user. We set it to www data, the group to triple-double data. Let's scroll down. For the PM, we're using dynamic, but the biggest part is this one right here, the max requests. This number should always equal to this number here, the keep alive requests. If these two are not equal, then your requests will randomly give you 502 errors because either FPM or Nginx will end the request. So they have to be equal. Now let's go ahead and go to our PHP init file. And in here, we want to set our OP cache configurations. Actually, before we do that, let's go back to our Docker file. And I'm going to create some variables for OB cache. This way, we don't have to have multiple configuration files. You can just adjust it in here. So we're going to write env. Our first variable is going to be called php_op cache underscore enable, and we're going to set it to 1. We're going to create another one, PHP underscore OP cache, and let's call it enable CLI, and let's set this to 0. And we want to write another one, env PHP OP cache validate timestamp, and let's set this to 1, env PHP underscore OP cache revalidate frequency, and let's set this to 1. Now let's go back to our PHP init file. So that was inside our Docker PHP init. And here, let's go ahead and use OP cache. So we're gonna write zend underscore extension equal opcache.so. Now under here, you wanna write opcache.enable, and this will enable or disable OP cache. And we wanna specify that from our env value that we created. So that was PHP underscore opcache underscore enable. Let's go ahead and copy paste this. And let's add one for the CLI. So in here, beside enable, you add underscore CLI. And we created the same variable here, underscore CLI. Now we're going to set our OP cache validate timestamp and validate frequency. So we write opcache dot validate underscore timestamp equal, and let's reference our variable. So we called it opcache validate timestamp. Actually, I'm just going to pull my Docker file and put it in here. And let's make sure we're using the right variables. So let's go back to our PHP init. So for the validate timestamp, we have it right here. Let's copy paste it. Let's duplicate this and let's add one for the frequency. So in here, it is called revalidate frequency. Now guys, I'm not going to spend too much time explaining what all of these flags do, but to give you guys a general idea, let's just go to our browser. And in here, you want to search for PHP OP cache configuration. In here, you have these results. Let's go ahead and go to the first one. And in here, if you take a look, there's all the flags that we used, plus there's all the other ones that you can also use. So the enable ones are very simple. They're going to enable and disable. Now for the revalidate frequency and valid timestamp, let's go here. So for the timestamps, if enabled, basically OP cache will update the scripts every frequency seconds. So this is the amount of seconds that we specified. In here, in our variable, we said every 1 second. And here, we're validating the timestamp. And here, the CLI, we have it set to 0. You can set it to 1, that's fine. Now let's go back to our Docker file. And in here, we want to use our configuration files. So right under here, let's go ahead and copy our configuration files. So I'm going to write copy, and we're going to reference our Docker php.init file. And we want to place this inside user, local, etc, php, and php init. These are the default locations for PHP configuration for our server. Let's do the same thing for PHP-FPM. So that's inside Docker PHP. We called it php-fpm.conf. And we want to place this inside user, local, etc, php-fpm.d/www.conf. That's where we want to save it. This is the default for the FPM configuration file. Let's add one more, copy, and we want to copy our Docker nginx/nginx.conf. And we want to place this inside etc nginx.configuration. That should be pretty much it. Let's give it a quick try. In here, let's go ahead and write docker compose build no cache and run docker compose up force recreate with the detached flag. Now in here, for some reason, looks like my docker compose up command didn't run. So I'm just going to copy this and run it manually. So we want to run docker compose up force recreate -d. Okay, looks like we made a mistake here. So it's supposed to be force recreate, not create. Now looks like that's good to go. Let's write docker compose ps. In here, it looks like our PHP container has an error. So let's see the log. So we write docker logs PHP. In here, it's saying unknown directive, keep alive requests. And there's a typo right here. We're missing the S on the requests. Let's go back to our Nginx configuration file. That's inside Docker, Nginx configuration. And let's fix that. So here, requests. Let's try to write docker compose up -d again. And write docker compose ps. Now looks like there's another error. Let's see what it says. So we're going to write docker logs php. Now, if you see here, this error is the same error that we had previously, but we already fixed it in here. The reason why this is not updated is because when you write docker compose up, it will try to rebuild from the cache. So docker caches everything. That's why we always write docker compose build no cache, and then you can execute docker compose up with the force recreate flag. Now let's give this a try. Now once that's done, let's go ahead and write docker compose ps. In here, we look like we still have an error in our PHP container. So let's write docker logs php. And here it's saying unknown directive, client max size body. Let's fix that. It's a typo as well. So the issue here is that there is no colons in here for these two. Again, you guys don't need to have these. I just added it for reference because one day, once your website scales, you might need to adjust these. So let's go ahead and write docker compose build no cache and docker compose up force recreate with the detached flag. Now let's write docker compose ps. Looks like they're both running. Let's go back to our browser and let's refresh our homepage. Actually, I'm going to open developer tools here and let's go ahead and refresh. So you should see the Laravel webpage here. Take a look at our amazing load performances here. So we have 5 milliseconds, refresh 10, 7, 7, 6, 6, 7, 6, 7. So this is very, very fast. And the reason for this is that we're using Nginx and OP cache. So what OP cache does is pretty much cache all our project files. Now, this is not good to use locally. So for locally, you need to make sure that you actually turn it off because sometimes you want to make a lot of changes to your files. If you do, they will not be reflected. That's why if you go to your code editor and let's go ahead and go to our Docker file. In here, what you want to do on local is you want to make sure that you set this to 0 and you want to set this to 0 as well. And these two will make sure that we always update our files. In here, you want to set this to 0 as well. Now for productions, you want to set all these flags to 1 and that should be pretty much it. Now just a side note, for all your future projects, if you go to my GitHub account, so that's at github.com/emad-zamout, Zaamot, that's the last name. And here, if you go to repositories, and I want you to search for Laravel-Docker-Nginx-PHP, and or this one right here. So I created this GitHub repository. It has all the code that we just did in here. But what you could do with this is when you create a new project locally, just copy this and pull it inside your project directly. And you should be able to immediately just run git init, pull this repository, set your env variable for the password and database name and all that stuff. And you can run docker compose build and docker compose up and it should work. So if you want to double check your work, you can check it out here. Thank you guys for watching. If you found this tutorial useful, I would highly appreciate it if you guys hit that like button. Otherwise, we'll see you guys on the next video. Thank you.